My
I
name is
remember
Robert
that winter
Mitchell.
like it
At
was
my daughter's
yesterday.
wedding in front of
We didn't
all her
have
rich and
much, but
powerful
we had
friends,
each other,
she
and
pointed
that
at me
fire
and called
kept us
me human
warm.
trash.
She was
I didn't
gone
say a
before the
word.
sun
I
rose
just
that
turned around
morning.
and walked out of her perfect,
I never
expensive
told
life.
anyone how
She thought
scared
she
I
had won,
was.
that she had finally
These
scrubbed
hands
the
have
grease of
shaped
her
wood for
working class
50
past
years in
from her
this very
beautiful white
room.
dress.
Every
She didn't
scar
know
tells
that
a
I had
story of
already
the
arranged
lessons
my own
learned by
wedding
the
gift, a little
firelight.
video presentation. And when it played a few hours later, her new husband didn't just ask for a divorce. He had her escorted from the premises. Before I tell you how a father's love can curdle into a cold, hard, and necessary justice, I'd be honored if you let me know in the comments where you're listening to my story from. In these worn office shoes, I've walked through 40 years of life so my daughter could step on red carpets. These shoes have carried me through factory floors, repair shops, and the city bus depot, where I've been the head mechanic for 4 decades. The soles are worn thin, much like my patience was that day, but they've never failed me. Unlike my daughter, the wedding invitation arrived 3 weeks ago. Thick cream-colored paper with gold embossing, the kind that announces money before you even read the words. Sarah Mitchell and Michael Reynolds request the honor of your presence. Formal attire required. I remember holding it in my rough, calloused hands and wondering if I belonged in the world it represented. I raised Sarah alone after Patricia died when our girl was just 8 years old. Cancer, quick and merciless. I became both mother and father, working double shifts at the bus depot, saving every penny for her education. I wanted to give her everything, every opportunity that Patricia and I never had, and I succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Sarah graduated from an Ivy League school, landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm, and began moving in circles I could never access. The phone call came the day after I received the invitation. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying that polished edge it had acquired in recent years, "about the wedding." There was a pause, the kind that precedes an uncomfortable request. "Try not to wear that old suit, okay, and maybe just try not to look so working class. Michael's family will be there, and they're very connected people." I felt something shift inside me, then a subtle recalibration of a lifetime of unconditional love. "I'll do my best, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice even. But after I hung up, I sat in my worn armchair for a long time, staring at a photograph of a gap-toothed little girl who once thought I hung the moon. They can take away my daughter, but they can't erase the calluses on my hands. Those calluses built her life one day of honest work at a time. They paid for dance lessons and college applications and the internship that wasn't paid but opened all the right doors. The wedding would remind me of this cruel truth. Sometimes success means outgrowing your roots, even when those roots ran deep with sacrifice and love. The Kiowa River Resort was a sprawling, impossibly green fantasy of a place just outside Charleston. I drove my old but reliable truck through gates that were bigger than my first apartment, down a long driveway lined with ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. It was like driving into a different world, a world where the grass was a shade of green I'd only ever seen in magazines, a world that smelled of money and salt air. I had been the head mechanic for the city bus depot for 40 years. I knew the smell of diesel, of hot metal, of honest sweat. This place smelled of none of those things. It smelled of perfume and privilege. A young man in a crisp uniform that probably cost more than my suit took my keys with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As I stepped out, I felt a familiar, uncomfortable feeling. It was the feeling of being an outsider, a ghost from a different life, haunting this perfect, polished world. I can fix anything from bus engines to broken hearts, but I can't fix the distance between two worlds. This thought came to me as I walked toward the grand, white-columned clubhouse, adjusting in my tie nervously. The string quartet played softly on a manicured lawn overlooking the ocean. Ladies in pastel dresses and men in tailored suits mingled champagne flutes, catching the afternoon sun. I straightened my shoulders and reminded myself that I had as much right to be here as any of them. I had paid for this wedding in ways they could never understand. I saw him first, Michael, my future son-in-law. He was a good man, a kind and earnest architect with a smile as open and honest as his blueprints. He saw me, and his face broke into a genuine, welcoming grin. He strode over, hand outstretched, pulling me into a warm, strong hug. "Robert," he said, his voice full of a sincere happiness that was a rare currency in this place. "You made it. I am so, so glad you're here." You have to see the setup for the ceremony. It looks incredible. He treated me not like an embarrassing old relative, but like an honored guest, like a father. He made me feel seen. And then I met her my daughter, Sarah. She was a vision, a queen in her own fairy tale. Her dress was a cloud of white silk that shimmered in the afternoon sun. Her hair swept up in a design so intricate it must have taken hours. She was standing with a group of women who all looked like they had stepped out of the same fashion magazine, their laughter a light tinkling sound, as carefully arranged as the flowers on the tables. Michael led me over. "Look who's here, honey," he said, his voice full of love for her. Sarah turned, and her smile, which had been so bright and dazzling for her friends, faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw me. It was a tiny thing, a flicker of an emotion I couldn't quite name, annoyance, embarrassment, before it was replaced by a perfect, practiced brilliance. "Daddy," she said, gliding over. She leaned in and gave me a hug that was all air and expensive perfume, her cheek barely brushing mine, before she pulled away. "You made it." I was getting worried. Her words said one thing, but her body language, the slight, almost imperceptible distance she kept between us, said another. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, baby girl," I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. "The place looks beautiful." "It's perfect, isn't it?" she replied, but her eyes weren't on me. They were already scanning the crowd behind me, her gaze flitting from one important guest to another. I was a box she had to check, a duty she had to perform before she could get back to the real business of her wedding: networking. My daughter now speaks to me like a banker to a customer with no money. The realization struck me as I stood there watching her expertly work the crowd. Each interaction was measured, each smile calculated for maximum effect. When had this happened? When had my Sarah, who once brought me dandelions and called them wishes, become this polished stranger? "Michael, honey," she said, her hand lightly touching his arm. "Isn't that the CEO from the architectural firm you wanted to talk to? You should go say hello." She was already managing the room, positioning her new husband like a chess piece. Michael, ever the good man, gave my shoulder a final warm squeeze. "We'll talk more later, Robert," he promised. And then he was gone, swallowed up by the sea of expensive suits. I was left standing there next to my own daughter, feeling like an exhibit in a museum. She asked me a few perfunctory questions about my drive down, about my health, her smile never wavering, her eyes never really seeing me. I was a story she had to tell. The humble working-class father who had worked his fingers to the bone so his brilliant daughter could have this perfect day. I was a useful prop, but I was just a prop. The distance between us was more than just the few inches of air. It was a canyon of ambition, of class, of a lifetime of choices that had led her here to this grand performance and had left me on the other side, a spectator who was no longer allowed backstage. My daughter, my beautiful Sarah, left me standing there, a ghost at her own wedding. The sea of smiling, wealthy strangers parted for her and then closed behind her, leaving me on an island of my own making. I was a man in a simple, dark suit in a world of shimmering pastels and designer labels. I was a calloused hand in a room full of soft, manicured fingers. I was a relic, and I had never felt it more acutely than in that moment. Michael, a good man, was busy being the perfect groom, and my daughter was busy being the perfect hostess. I was a loose end, a piece of the past that didn't quite fit into the perfect picture of her future. I couldn't stand there and make small talk about the stock market or summering in the Hamptons. It wasn't my world. It wasn't my language. I needed to breathe air that didn't smell of money and ambition. I turned and walked away from the main terrace, leaving the sound of the string quartet and the light tinkling laughter behind me. My path took me along a quiet, manicured walkway, a river of old Charleston brick, winding through a garden that was almost unnaturally perfect. The azaleas were in full glorious bloom, their colors so vibrant they hurt the eyes. The air was heavy with the sweet, cloying scent of jasmine. It was a beautiful place, but it felt like a stage set, a carefully constructed illusion with no real heart. I walked for a few minutes, my hands in my pockets, my old polished work shoes feeling heavy and out of place on the pristine bricks. Around a bend in the path, in a secluded corner of the garden, partially hidden by a large magnolia tree, I heard voices. Low, intimate voices. I slowed my steps, not wanting to intrude on someone's private moment, and then I saw them. Sarah, my daughter, her white dress luminous in the dappled shade, and a tall man with dark hair. They were standing very close, his hand on her waist, her head tilted up toward him. It wasn't Michael. It was another man, one I had been briefly introduced to earlier. Trevor, Michael's brother-in-law, married to Michael's sister. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. And then, as if in slow motion, Trevor leaned down and kissed my daughter. Not a brotherly kiss, not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a kiss full of passion and familiarity. The kiss of lovers. The world tilted beneath my feet. This couldn't be happening. Not today, not ever. Sarah was about to marry one of the finest young men I had ever met. Michael, who treated her like a queen, who looked at her with such adoration it almost hurt to see. Michael, who had treated me with more respect in the past year than my own daughter had in the last 5. I must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, or the scrape of my shoe on brick, because they broke apart suddenly, Sarah's eyes wide with shock as they found mine. "Dad," she gasped, stepping away from Trevor, who had the grace to look uncomfortable but not particularly ashamed. This, this isn't what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. I had lived too long, seen too much of the world to be fooled by such a transparent lie. I felt anger rising in me, a white-hot tide that threatened to overwhelm my careful self-control. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and steady, a trick I had learned long ago when managing men twice my size at the depot. "I need to speak with you. Alone." Trevor gave her a look that seemed to communicate something significant, then nodded slightly. "I'll give you two some privacy," he said, his voice smooth as silk as he brushed past me on the path. When he was gone, I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for perhaps the first time in years. What I saw broke my heart. The calculation in her eyes, the defensive set of her jaw, the slight curl of contempt at the corner of her mouth. This wasn't my little girl anymore. This was someone else entirely. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, keeping my voice low, even though we were alone in this secluded corner of the garden. "It's complicated, Dad," she said, brushing invisible lint from her perfect dress. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I said, "because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're cheating on Michael with his brother-in-law on your wedding day." "It's not like that," she said, a flash of irritation crossing her face. "Trevor and I, we have a connection. We've had it 4 months. I can't explain it. But when I'm with him, I feel alive in a way I never do with Michael." "And Michael," I asked, incredulous, "the man who worships the ground you walk on, the man who's waiting for you at the altar in less than 2 hours." "Michael is convenient," she said, and the callousness of the word struck me like a physical blow. "He's stable, respectable. His family has connections that will help both of us. He's a good man, I know that, but he's not exciting like Trevor." I finished, for her disgust rising in my throat. She looked at me then, a flash of the old Sarah, a moment of vulnerability in her otherwise perfect composure. "You don't understand what it's like, Dad. The pressure, the expectations. Everyone watching, judging. I have to make the right moves, be seen with the right people. And marrying a man you're cheating on is the right move," I asked, my voice rising, despite my efforts to control it. "Lower your voice," she hisses, glancing around nervously. "This is my wedding day. I won't have you ruining it with your working-class morality." The words hit me like a slap across the face. Working-class morality. As if honesty and fidelity were somehow beneath her now quaint notions that belonged in the world she had left behind. "You can change your name, change your clothes, change your voice, but you can't change who gave you blood and sweat," I said, feeling a profound sadness settle over me. "Sarah, you need to stop this wedding. You need to tell Michael the truth. It's the right thing to do." She laughed, then a short, brittle sound that held no humor. "The right thing to do. Do you have any idea what that would cost me? The humiliation, the gossip, the damage to my reputation?" "No, Dad, the wedding goes on as planned. Michael never needs to know about Trevor." "And after," I asked, "you'll continue this affair behind his back?" She shrugged, a small, elegant movement that somehow conveyed more ruthlessness than any words could have. "Life is complicated. Michael will have his perfect wife, the status, the social connections. I'll have security and freedom. Everyone gets what they want." "Except Michael," I said, my voice thick with disappointment. "He wants a wife who loves him, who's faithful to him." "He'll never know the difference," she said, and I saw something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. The absolute certainty that she was entitled to this deception, that the rules that governed ordinary people simply didn't apply to her. I raised you better than this, I said, the words torn from somewhere deep inside me. No, Dad, she said, her voice suddenly cold and distant. You raised me to reach for something better than what I came from. And I have. I've become someone. I matter in ways you can't even comprehend. At what cost? I asked, but I already knew the answer. The God was her soul, her integrity, everything that had once made her my beautiful, kind-hearted daughter. She glanced at her watch, a delicate, diamond-encrusted thing that probably cost more than my truck. This conversation is over. I have to get back. The photographer wants some shots with my bridesmaids before the ceremony. She brushed past me, the silk of her dress whispering against the brick path. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Don't make a scene, Dad. Just be the proud father for a few more hours. Then you can go back to your life, and I'll go on with mine. I watched her walk away, her back straight, her step confident. She had dismissed me as easily as she might have dismissed a waiter who had brought the wrong appetizer. In that moment, I knew something fundamental had changed between us, perhaps forever. There are words that can kill a father's love faster than a bullet. My daughter's dismissal of everything I had taught her, everything I had sacrificed for, cut deeper than any physical wound could have. I stood alone in that perfect garden, surrounded by blooms that would wilt in a week, and felt a resolve hardening in my chest. I had tried to reach her with love, with reason, with appeals to the girl I had raised. She had rejected it all. The rehearsal dinner that evening was a carefully choreographed affair. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, casting warm light on tables adorned with arrangements of white roses and silver candelabras. The guests, already slightly flushed from premium champagne, laughed and chatted as they took their seats. I was placed at a table far from the main party with distant relatives of Michael's family who clearly had no idea who I was or why I merited an invitation. Sarah had positioned me safely out of the way, where my rough edges and unfashionable suit wouldn't disturb the perfect tableau she had created. From my vantage point, I could see her holding court at the head table, radiant in a different dress, now something sleek and champagne color that caught the light when she moved. Michael sat beside her, his face open and happy, occasionally leaning over to whisper something in her ear that made her smile. It was a convincing performance. If I hadn't seen what I had seen in the garden, I might have believed it myself. Trevor was seated at another table with his wife, Michael's sister, a pretty blonde woman who seemed entirely unaware that her husband was sleeping with the bride. The unfairness of it all, the sheer callous disregard for these good people who had welcomed Sarah into their lives, made my blood boil. As the dinner progressed, I noticed Sarah and Michael engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation. His face clouded briefly, a frown marring his usually cheerful expression. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Sarah gesture in my direction, her movements sharp and dismissive. Later, as I stood by the bar waiting for a drink, Michael approached me. His smile was still friendly, but there was a new wariness in his eyes. Robert, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder, Sarah mentioned you two had a conversation earlier. We did, I acknowledged, wondering how much she had told him. He nodded, looking uncomfortable. She said you gave her quite the lecture, something about her choices, her lifestyle. So that was the story she had spun. I was the backward, judgmental father, disapproving of his daughter's success, her elevated social status. A convenient narrative that would explain any tension between us while neatly sidestepping the truth. Michael, I began, uncertain how to proceed. This good man deserved to know what kind of woman he was marrying. But here on the eve of his wedding, surrounded by friends and family, celebrating his happiness, it seemed cruel, almost vindictive. Before I could decide what to say, Sarah appeared at his side, her arms sliding possessively through his. There you are, she said, her eyes fixed on me with a warning I couldn't mistake. Mom is looking for you. Something about the final toast order. Right, Michael said, giving my shoulder a final squeeze. We'll catch up more tomorrow, Robert, at the ceremony. As they walked away, Sarah glanced back at me, her message clear. Stay silent. Play your part. I finished my drink and slipped away from the dinner, early retreating to my modest hotel room a few miles from the resort. I couldn't bear to watch the farce any longer, couldn't stomach the thought of Sarah's betrayal being celebrated with toasts and laughter. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, and faced the hardest decision of my life. Could I stand by tomorrow and watch Michael pledge his life to a woman who was already betraying him? Could I remain silent, knowing what I knew? And if I spoke up, what then? I would be seen as the villain, the jealous father trying to ruin his daughter's perfect day. Sarah would deny everything, and who would believe my word against hers in this world where she now belonged? And I was merely a visitor. The answer came to me slowly, painfully, as the night deepened around me. Sometimes love means accepting being the villain in someone else's story. My love for my daughter had always been unconditional, but that didn't mean I could condone what she was doing. My respect for Michael, for the truth itself, demanded action. I picked up my phone and made a call to a number I had stored 2 weeks earlier, when I had first begun to suspect something wasn't right with Sarah. The private investigator had been expensive, nearly emptying my modest savings, but his work had been thorough. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice professional and neutral. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you again." "I need the full package after all," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Everything you found, the video, the text messages, all of it, on a USB drive. Can you deliver it to the Kiowa River Resort by tomorrow morning?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're sure about this? It's pretty damning stuff." "I'm sure," I said, feeling a terrible certainty settle over me. "And I need one more thing. I need you to speak to whoever handles the audio-visual equipment for the reception tomorrow. I want that USB ready to play after the cake cutting." Another pause, longer this time. "That's going to cost extra, and it's a pretty nuclear option, sir." "I know what it is," I said, closing my eyes against the pain of what I was setting in motion. "Can you do it or not?" "I can do it," he confirmed. "But Mr. Mitchell, once this bell is rung, there's no unringing it." "Some bells need to be rung," I said, thinking of Michael's honest face, of the life of lies Sarah was preparing to build with him, no matter how painful the sound. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my hotel room for a long time. I had set something terrible in motion, something that would irrevocably change my relationship with my daughter. But I kept coming back to a simple truth. If Sarah had listened to me in the garden, if she had shown any remorse, any willingness to do the right thing, none of this would be necessary. I thought of Patricia then, of what she would say if she were here. My wife had been the moral compass of our family, the one who saw through pretense and deception with uncanny clarity. "Truth isn't always kind," she used to say, "but it's always right." Tomorrow would bring pain, humiliation, anger, but it would also bring truth. And in the end, that was all I had left to give. To my daughter, to Michael, to myself. The truth, however bitter, was the last gift of a father who had given everything else. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself had been bribed to cooperate with Sarah's vision. I dressed slowly in my hotel room, putting on the same suit that Sarah had hoped I wouldn't wear, straightening the tie that had been Patricia's last gift to me before she died. I had barely slept, my mind replaying the conversation in the garden, the cold calculation in my daughter's eyes, the choice I had made in response. There was still time to stop what I had set in motion. A phone call was all it would take. But each time I reached for my phone, I saw Michael's face, imagined the years of lies ahead of him, and my hand fell away. The ceremony was to be held on the grand lawn of the resort overlooking the river that gave the place its name. White chairs had been arranged in perfect rows, a flower-covered archway stood ready at the front, and musicians were setting up to one side. I arrived early, parking my truck at the far end of the lot, away from the gleaming luxury cars that were beginning to arrive. As I walked toward the ceremony site, I saw the private investigator standing near the entrance to the resort's ballroom, where the reception would be held later. He gave me a small nod, confirming that everything was in place. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. There was no going back now. I found a seat near the back of the arrangement, not wanting to draw attention. Guests were arriving in small groups, the women in colorful dresses and impractical heels, the men in suits that fit them perfectly, unlike my own slightly too loose jacket. I was a brown sparrow among peacocks, and I felt eyes sliding over me, dismissive and curious in equal measure. As the ceremony time approached, I saw Michael standing at the front with the minister, looking nervous but happy. His groomsmen, including Trevor, stood nearby, adjusting cufflinks and straightening ties. Trevor caught my eye across the lawn, and something in his expression, a smug confidence perhaps, or a flash of guilt quickly suppressed, made my resolve harden further. The music changed, signaling the start of the ceremony. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle, followed by a flower girl scattering rose petals from a silver basket. And then came Sarah on the arm of Michael's father, a role that should have been mine, but which Sarah had delicately suggested might be better filled by her future father-in-law. Just to keep things balanced, she had explained. Another small rejection, another piece of evidence that I was an embarrassment to be minimized. She was breathtaking, a vision in white and diamonds, her face partly obscured by a delicate veil. The guests sighed in appreciation as she passed. At the front, Michael's face lit up with love and wonder as he watched her approach. My heart ached for him, for the disillusionment that lay ahead. The ceremony proceeded with practiced precision. The minister spoke of love and commitment, of honoring and cherishing. Sarah and Michael exchanged vows they had written themselves. Sarah's voice clear and confident as she promised faithfulness and devotion. I felt sick listening to the beautiful lies falling from her lips, knowing what I knew. And then it was done. They were pronounced husband and wife. Michael lifted Sarah's veil and kissed her tenderly, and the guests broke into applause. I remained seated, unable to bring myself to celebrate this travesty. As the newlyweds turned to face their guests, Sarah's eyes found mine in the crowd. Even from a distance, I could see the warning in them, the command to play my part, to smile and congratulate and pretend. I rose slowly to my feet, feeling every one of my 58 years. The reception that followed was held in the resort's grand ballroom, a cavernous space transformed by flowers, candles, and twinkling lights into something from a fairy tale. I sat at my assigned table, far from the head table where Sarah and Michael sat, surrounded by their wedding party. I picked at my food, unable to eat, counting the minutes until the cake cutting that would signal the beginning of the end. After the meal came the speeches. Michael's father, eloquent and warm. The best man, with humorous stories about Michael's childhood. The maid of honor, tearful and sincere in her affection for Sarah. Throughout it all, I sat silent, the only father of the bride in history not asked to speak at his daughter's wedding. And then it happened. As the speeches wound down, Sarah left her seat and walked toward me, her smile fixed and determined. She stopped at my table, champagne glass in hand, and conversation around us died as people sensed a moment unfolding. "I wanted to thank my father for being here today," she said, her voice carrying easily in the suddenly quiet room, "for giving me the foundation to build the life I have now." It should have been a touching moment, a public acknowledgement of my role in her life. But her eyes were cold, her words carefully chosen to maintain the narrative she had created. The humble origins, she had transcended the father who was a quaint reminder of where she had come from, not an integral part of who she was. I felt something break inside me, then a final severing of the connection between the father I had been and the prop I had become. I stood up, intending to simply walk away, to leave this place and these people before the storm I had set in motion could break. But Sarah, perhaps mistaking my movement for an attempt to speak, to claim my rightful place in this celebration, stepped back slightly, her expression hardening. "Please, Dad," she said, her voice low but clear enough to be heard by those nearby. "Don't make a scene. Just for once, try to fit in with these people. They're my world now." "Your world," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "Yes," she said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "My world. Not the bus depot, not that tiny house with its peeling paint, not the life you seem so determined to drag into this beautiful day." I looked at her, then really looked at my daughter, and saw a stranger wearing Sarah's face. A woman so consumed by ambition and appearances that she had lost sight of everything that truly mattered. "You're ashamed of me," I said, a statement rather than a question. "I'm ashamed of what you represent," she corrected, her voice dropping to an angry whisper. "The working class mentality, the outdated values, the ordinariness. I've worked so hard to leave all that behind." The words struck me like physical blows. All around us, guests were watching with the avid curiosity of people sensing drama unfolding. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "Everything I had, everything I was. And I'm grateful," she said, but her eyes said otherwise. "But this is my day, my life now. And if you can't celebrate that without dragging your blue-collar morality into it, then maybe you should leave." The final blow came then, the words that would echo in my mind for months afterward. "Look around, Dad," she said, gesturing at the opulent room, the wealthy guests, the life she had chosen. "This is who I am now, and you're just Human trash that I've had to cart around because of biology. The sooner you understand that, the better for both of us. Human trash. My daughter, the child I had raised alone after her mother died, the girl I had sacrificed everything for, had just called me human trash in front of a room full of strangers. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked out of her perfect, expensive life. But as I reached the door of the ballroom, I caught the eye of the audiovisual technician standing by his equipment. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. She thought she had won, that she had finally scrubbed the grease of her working-class past from her beautiful white dress. She didn't know that I had already arranged my own wedding gift, a little video presentation. And when it played a few hours later, her new husband didn't just ask for a divorce. He had her escorted from the premises. As I walked to my truck under the Carolina stars, I felt a terrible weight settle over me. I had lost my daughter today, but perhaps in losing her, I had saved a good man from a lifetime of lies and betrayal. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only one I had. The drive back to my hotel was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but I barely noticed. The words echoed in my mind, relentless and cutting. Human trash. My own daughter had looked me in the eye and called me human trash. I pulled into the hotel parking lot, a modest place 15 miles from the opulent resort where Sarah's wedding reception continued without me. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my suit tie loose around my neck, and tried to make sense of what had happened. How had we come to this? When had the little girl who once rode on my shoulders become this cold, calculating stranger? Sometimes the greatest love is letting others face the truth of who they are. This thought came to me as I stared at my phone, wondering if I should call the AV technician and stop what was about to happen. There was still time. I could spare Sarah the public humiliation, spare Michael the pain of learning the truth in front of everyone he knew. But that would only delay the inevitable. Michael deserved to know what kind of woman he had married. And Sarah needed to face the consequences of her choices. Not out of vengeance, but because without consequences, there could be no growth, no redemption. 2 weeks ago, I had first noticed something was off. Sarah had invited me to a pre-wedding dinner at an upscale restaurant in Charleston. I arrived early and was seated at the bar nursing a beer while I waited. That's when I saw them, Sarah and Trevor entering a private dining room at the back of the restaurant. There was something in the way he touched the small of her back, the way she leaned into him, that set off alarm bells in my head. When Sarah finally joined me 20 minutes later, her cheeks were flushed, her lipstick slightly smudged. She explained that she'd been caught in traffic. The lie came so easily to her, so naturally, that I almost doubted what I had seen. Almost. The next day, I made the call to Madison Investigations. James Madison, the owner, was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases. His services weren't cheap, and the retainer nearly emptied my savings account, but I needed to know if what I suspected was true. I hope I'm wrong, I told him during our initial meeting. I hope you tell me I'm just a paranoid old man. 3 days later, Madison called me to his office. I wish I could tell you what you want to hear, Mr. Mitchell, he said, sliding a manila envelope across his desk. But you're not wrong. Inside were photographs, text message, transcripts, hotel receipts. Sarah and Trevor had been meeting in secret for months. Their affair had begun shortly after Sarah and Michael's engagement, but it was the video that truly broke my heart. Madison had placed a hidden camera in the hotel room where Sarah and Trevor had arranged to meet. The footage was explicit, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. But it was their conversation afterward that truly chilled me. When are you going to tell Michael? Trevor asked, lounging on the bed, unconcerned about his own marriage to Michael's sister. Sarah laughed, a sound I didn't recognize. Tell him? Why would I tell him? Michael is my ticket into his world. His family name, his connections. Do you know what that's worth? So what about us? Trevor asked, pulling her back into his arms. We'll continue this, she said, kissing him. Michael works so much he'll never know. He trusts me completely. Her voice turned mocking. He thinks I'm his perfect angel. And your father? Trevor asked. He watches you like a hawk. I saw how he looked at me at the engagement party. Sarah's face hardened. My father is a relic, a reminder of everything I've worked so hard to escape. Don't worry about him. After the wedding, I'll make sure he stays firmly in his place, out of my new life. I had stopped the video, then unable to watch anymore. Madison offered to continue the surveillance to gather more evidence, but I declined. I had seen enough. The question was, what would I do with this information? For days, I wrestled with the decision. I thought about confronting Sarah privately, giving her a chance to end things honorably before she made a terrible mistake. I thought about going directly to Michael, sparing him a lifetime with a woman who saw him as nothing more than a ticket to status and wealth. In the end, I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that perhaps I had misunderstood, that maybe Sarah truly did love Michael despite her indiscretion. I wanted to believe the best of my daughter. Then came the confrontation in the garden, and any illusions I had about Sarah's intentions crumbled to dust. She wasn't just making a mistake. She was deliberately, calculatingly setting up a life built on lies. Even then, I had given her one last chance. I had urged her to be honest with Michael, to call off the wedding. She had thrown that chance back in my face with contempt. I didn't call Madison back until the night before the wedding, after the rehearsal dinner. "The full package," I told him. "Everything you found. And I want it played at the reception." Now, sitting in my hotel room, I knew there would be no turning back from what I had set in motion. In a few hours, Sarah's carefully constructed facade would shatter. Michael would know the truth. The guests would witness her humiliation. And I would be the architect of it all. Was this justice or revenge? The line between them seemed so thin now, so permeable. I wanted to believe I was acting out of principle, out of a desire to protect Michael from a life of deception. But there was anger in me too, a deep burning resentment at how my daughter had treated me, how she had rejected everything I had taught her. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Madison. "It's done. Video will play after the cake cutting as arranged. Are you sure about this?" I stared at the message for a long time. Was I sure? No, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But I was committed. I texted back a simple yes. Then I removed my tie, hung up my suit jacket, and lay down on the hotel bed, fully clothed. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion claimed me, pulling me into troubled dreams where Sarah was a little girl again, holding my hand as we walked through a field of wildflowers, her laughter pure and untouched by ambition. I was awakened by pounding on my hotel room door. Disoriented, I checked my watch, 9:47 p.m. The reception would be in full swing. The cake cutting usually happened around 10. I had less than 15 minutes to stop what was about to happen, if that's what I decided to do. The pounding continued. I rolled off the bed and opened the door, expecting to find Madison or perhaps a hotel employee. Instead, I found Trevor. He looked disheveled, his bow tie undone, his eyes wild with panic. "What have you done?" he demanded, pushing past me into the room. "How did you find me?" I asked, my mind still foggy with sleep. "Sarah had your hotel information in her phone," he said, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "What have you done, old man?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, though I suspected I did. "The AV guy," Trevor said, running a hand through his hair. "He pulled me aside just now, said something about a special video presentation arranged by the father of the bride. Said it was set to play right after the cake cutting." His eyes narrowed. "What's on that video, Mitchell?" I said nothing, watching him squirm. This was the man who had helped my daughter betray a good person, who had shown no remorse for his own betrayal of his wife, Michael's sister. "Tell me," he shouted, stepping toward me aggressively. "The truth," I said simply. "That's what's on the video. The truth about you and Sarah." Trevor's face paled. You've been spying on us." "I hired someone to confirm what I already suspected," I corrected. "And he found more than I ever wanted to know." "You can't do this," Trevor said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Do you have any idea what this will do to Michael, to my wife, to the whole family?" "I'm well aware," I said, "and you should have thought of that before you started sleeping with your brother-in-law's fiancée." Trevor's expression shifted, the panic giving way to calculation. "Look," he said, his voice suddenly reasonable, persuasive. "What happened between Sarah and me, it's complicated, but it doesn't have to destroy everyone's lives. Tell me how to stop the video. We can work something out." "Work something out," I repeated, incredulous. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "Money," he said immediately. "I can pay you. Name your price." I laughed, a harsh sound even to my own ears. "You think this is about money? You think you can buy me off?" "Everyone has a price," Trevor insisted. "And let's be honest, you could use the money. That suit you're wearing, off the rack, 10 years ago, your truck is at least 15 years old. I saw your house when I dropped Sarah off once. It needs a new roof, new siding. His casual contempt for my life, for everything I had worked for and built, was so similar to Sarah's that it was almost comical. They deserved each other, these two selfish, entitled people. My price, I said slowly, is the truth. That's all I want. For Michael to know the truth before he spends years of his life with someone who sees him as nothing but a meal ticket. Trevor's face hardened. I warned Sarah about you. I told her you were a problem that needed handling. She should have listened. Handling, I repeated, a chill running down my spine. You have no idea who you're dealing with, old man. Trevor said, his voice low and menacing. I have connections you can't even imagine. One phone call, and your life becomes very, very difficult. Think about it. Your job, your home, your reputation. I can take it all away. I looked at this man, this entitled, arrogant man who thought he could threaten me, who thought his connections could frighten me into compliance. And I realized something: I had nothing left to lose. Sarah had already rejected me. My reputation meant nothing to me compared to doing what was right. Make your call, I said quietly. Do your worst. The video plays. Trevor's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing the front of my shirt. You stupid, stubborn old fool. His threat was cut off by the ringing of his phone. He released me, fumbling to pull it from his pocket. He checked the screen, his expression changing from anger to confusion. It's Michael, he said, showing me the screen. Why would he be calling me now? He's supposed to be at the reception. A sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. Answer it, I said. I think you know why he's calling. Trevor's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the call. Michael, hey, what's... Even from where I stood, I could hear the shouting on the other end of the line. Trevor's face drained of color. Michael, calm down, I can explain. More shouting, then Trevor pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at it. He hung up on me, he said, his voice hollow. It seems, I said, that the video has played. Trevor looked at me with pure hatred. You've ruined everything. Everything. No, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. You and Sarah did that all on your own. I just made sure everyone knows it. Trevor's phone began ringing again. This time it was his wife calling. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then declined the call. Coward, I said softly. He glared at me, then stormed toward the door. This isn't over, he threatened. Not by a long shot. It is for me, I said, and strangely I meant it. Whatever happened next, the fallout, the recriminations, the damage, I had done what I believed was right. I had protected a good man from a lifetime of lies. I had held my daughter accountable for her choices, painful as that was. After Trevor left, I sat back down on the bed, suddenly exhausted again. My phone remained silent. No call from Sarah, no message from Michael, just silence. I wondered what was happening at the reception, how the guests had reacted, what Sarah had said in her own defense. But I didn't wonder long. In a strange way, I felt detached from it all now, as if having set these events in motion, I was no longer part of the story. I checked out of the hotel early the next morning and drove home. The 6-hour journey passed in a blur of highways and rest stops, my mind oddly empty. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't listen to music. I just drove, watching the landscape change from the lush coastal plains of South Carolina to the rolling hills of my home state. My house looked smaller somehow when I pulled into the driveway. The paint was peeling, as Trevor had so contemptuously pointed out. The roof did need replacing. The yard needed mowing. But it was my home, built with honest work and paid for with honest money. I felt no shame in it. Inside, I moved through the quiet rooms like a ghost. I hung up my suit, pulled on old jeans and a worn flannel shirt, and made myself a simple dinner. Then I sat at the kitchen table where Sarah had once done her homework and waited for the phone to ring. It didn't. Days passed. I returned to work at the bus depot, immersing myself in the familiar routines of maintenance schedules and repair orders. My colleagues sensed something was wrong, but knew me well enough not to pry. At night, I came home to the empty house, ate alone, went to bed early. A week after the wedding, an envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a check for the amount I had contributed to the wedding expenses, along with a brief note from Michael's father. Under the circumstances, we felt this was appropriate. We wish you well. No mention of Sarah, no explanation of what had happened after the video played. Just a severing of ties, clean and businesslike. I tore up the check and threw it away. 2 weeks after the wedding, I was in my workshop behind the house working on a small wood carving project when a car pulled into my driveway. A sleek black BMW so out of place in my working-class neighborhood that several neighbors came out onto their porches to stare. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Sarah come to confront me, or perhaps even to apologize. But when the car door opened, it was Michael who stepped out. He looked different, thinner with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But there was something else too, a new hardness in his expression, a wariness that hadn't been there before. I set down my tools and met him at the workshop door. "Michael," I said, unsure how to greet this man who had almost been my son-in-law, who had been betrayed not just by Sarah, but in a way by me as well. "Robert," he said, his voice formal, distant. "May I come in?" I gestured him inside, suddenly self-conscious about the cluttered space, the sawdust on the floor, the half-finished carvings on the workbench. This was my sanctuary, my place of peace. Having Michael here felt like worlds colliding. He stood awkwardly in the center of the workshop, looking around at the tools, the wood, the projects in various stages of completion. "I didn't know you were a woodworker," he said. "It's just a hobby," I said, "something to keep my hands busy." Michael nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "I should have called first. I'm sorry for just showing up like this." "It's all right," I said. "Would you like some coffee or something stronger?" "Stronger," he said immediately. "If you don't mind." I nodded and led him into the house to the small living room where Sarah's childhood photos still hung on the walls. I poured us each a glass of bourbon, nothing fancy, just a decent mid-shelf brand I kept for special occasions. Michael took his glass and sat on the edge of the sofa, his back straight, his movements stiff. He looked at the photos on the wall, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again," I said, breaking the silence. Michael took a long sip of his bourbon. "I wasn't sure I wanted to see you again," he admitted. After what happened." "I understand," I said, and I did. In his place, I might have wanted to sever all connections to the Mitchell family to put the whole painful episode behind me. "No," Michael said, shaking his head. "I don't think you do." He set his glass down carefully on the coffee table. "Do you know what happened after that video played?" I shook my head. "Trevor came to my hotel room right before. He seemed to think he could stop it. After that, I came home. No one's told me anything." Michael laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "It was chaos, complete and utter chaos. The video, it wasn't just Sarah and Trevor being intimate. It was their conversation afterward. About me, about you." I winced. I had forgotten about that part, the cruel things Sarah had said about Michael about me. "Sarah tried to deny it at first," Michael continued, his voice flat. "Said the video was fake, that you had somehow engineered it all because you were jealous of her success, resentful of her marrying into money. And people believed her. I asked, though I already knew the answer. In that world, in that context, of course, they would believe the beautiful bride over the working-class father. Some did," Michael acknowledged, "for about 5 minutes. Then I asked her to explain how a fake video could show the birthmark on her left hip, the one shaped like Florida, the one only someone who had seen her naked would know about. I looked down at my glass, uncomfortable with the intimacy of this detail. She couldn't explain that," Michael said. "And then Trevor's wife, my sister Emma, she started screaming. She'd recognized the hotel room in the video. It was the same hotel where Trevor had taken her for their anniversary. The same suite." I closed my eyes, feeling sick. I hadn't known that detail. Madison hadn't mentioned it when he showed me the footage. "After that, it all fell apart," Michael said. "Emma had to be sedated. My parents were devastated. The guests started leaving. And Sarah..." He trailed off, taking another long swallow of bourbon. "What about Sarah?" I asked quietly. Michael's face hardened. "She turned on you. Said you'd planned this from the start, that you had always resented her success, her escaping your working-class life. Said you were pathologically jealous of anyone who had more than you did." The accusation stung, even though I had expected something like it. "And you," I asked, "what did you think?" Michael was silent for a long moment, studying his glass. At first, I was too shocked to think anything. Then I was angry, furious, not just at Sarah and Trevor, but at you too, for choosing to expose it all that way in front of everyone. It felt cruel. It was, I admitted. But I had tried to talk to Sarah privately, the day before in the garden. I caught them together. I begged her to tell you the truth to call off the wedding. She refused. Michael looked surprised. You confronted her before the wedding. I nodded. She said it was complicated, that you were convenient, that you'd never know the difference. Michael flinched as if I'd struck him. And you decided to show me the difference, in the most public way possible. I gave her a chance to do the right thing, I said. She threw it back in my face, and at the reception when she called me, what she called me, I knew she had no intention of ever being honest with you. Human trash, Michael said quietly. That's what she called you. I heard it. Everyone heard it. I nodded, the words still raw, even in repetition. Michael set his glass down again, leaning forward, his eyes finally meeting mine directly. Why did you do it, Robert? Really? Was it revenge for how she treated you? Or was it something else? The question deserved an honest answer. I thought carefully before speaking. Part of it was anger, I admitted. Hurt. My own daughter had rejected everything I ever taught her about honesty, about integrity. She was willing to build her life with you, on a foundation of lies. And yes, I was angry about how she treated me. But that wasn't why I did it. Then why, Michael pressed. Because you deserve better, I said simply. Because you're a good man, Michael, a man of honor. And Sarah was going to take that goodness, that honor, and exploit it for her own gain. She was going to lie to you every day, betray you every chance she got, and you would never know. You would waste years of your life, perhaps have children with her, build a life on quicksand, and one day it would all come crashing down anyway, as these things always do. But by then the damage would be so much worse. Michael was silent, his expression thoughtful, assessing. I didn't do it to hurt Sarah, I continued. I did it to save you, and maybe in some strange way to save her too, from becoming the kind of person who could live that lie for years without remorse. Michael stood up suddenly, walking to the window that overlooked my small backyard. His back was to me, his shoulders tense. Do you know what the worst part was? He asked, his voice so low I had to strain to hear him. What? I asked. Watching that video, seeing her with him, hearing her talk about me like I was just a stepping stone, it hurt. God, it hurt like nothing I've ever felt before. But the worst part, he turned to face me. The worst part was that I still loved her. Even in that moment, even knowing what she'd done, who she really was, some part of me still loved her. Still wanted to forgive her, to believe there was some explanation, some way we could fix things. The raw pain in his voice made my chest ache. This was the true cost of my actions, not just Sarah's humiliation or my own isolation, but this good man's suffering. I'm sorry, I said inadequately, for the pain I caused you. Michael shook his head. Don't apologize. Not for that. Because here's the thing, Robert. As the days passed, as the anger started to fade, and all that was left was the truth, I started to see it clearly. He came back to the sofa, sitting down again, his eyes intent on mine. You didn't do it to me. You did it for me. You knew the truth, and you knew I was too blind, too in love to ever see it on my own. I said nothing, my throat too tight for words. You tried to warn her, didn't you? Michael asked. That day before the ceremony. I knew it, he continued when I nodded. She told me you'd given her a lecture. She was furious. I just thought you were being an overprotective father. He leaned forward, his eyes full of a new profound understanding. You gave her a chance. You tried to solve it with honor. And when she threw that back in your face, when she called you what she called you chose to save me from a lifetime of lies, even though you knew it would cost you your own daughter. His voice dropped to a whisper, intense and emotional. That is the hardest, bravest, most honorable thing would you have ever seen anyone do. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. I hadn't cried since Patricia's funeral, and I wouldn't start now. She didn't just betray me, Robert. Michael continued, his own eyes suspiciously bright. She betrayed you. You gave her everything, and she threw it all away for what? For a thrill, for the approval of a snake like Trevor. He shook his head in disbelief. I'll never understand it. We were no longer a father-in-law and a son-in-law. We were just two men from different generations, from different worlds, who had been bound together by the same terrible betrayal. We were the survivors of the same shipwreck. I'm so sorry for the way it happened, I said, my voice finally breaking. I never wanted to cause you that kind of public pain. You didn't cause it, Michael replied, his voice firm. You just revealed it. There's a difference that you held up a mirror and the whole world saw the truth. He reached across the table and gripped my shoulder. It was an act of mercy, Robert. A brutal, painful, and necessary mercy. The words washed over me like absolution. We sat in a new kind of silence, then a silence of shared grief and strange, unexpected camaraderie. The weight of guilt I had been carrying, the fear that I had irreparably damaged this good man began to lift, replaced by a quiet, profound relief. He stayed for another hour. We talked not about the past, but about the future, about his plans to rebuild his firm, about my work at the depot, and my wood carving hobby. It was the easy, comfortable conversation of two old friends. When he finally stood up to leave, he shook my hand, his grip firm. Thank you, Robert, he said again, for everything. I watched him drive away, and for the first time since that terrible day at the wedding, the peace I felt was not the empty peace of a quiet house. It was a full and warm peace. I had lost a daughter, but in the strangest, most unexpected of ways, I had found a son. The visit from Michael was a turning point. It was a small act of grace, a quiet acknowledgement from the man who had been most hurt that my actions, as brutal as they were, had come from a place of honor. It did not erase the pain, but it eased the burden of my own conscience. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of quiet, a quiet that was not empty, but simply peaceful. I spent most of my days where I had always been most comfortable. In my workshop, the small, cluttered space behind my house, filled with the comforting, holy smell of sawdust and machine oil. My hands, which had been idle and trembling for so long, were busy again. There is a truth in woodworking that cannot be found anywhere else. You cannot lie to a piece of oak. You cannot manipulate a block of maple. It is what it is, and you must work with the grain. You must respect the flaws. You must be honest in your craft. And in that honesty, I found a kind of salvation. I was working on a small, simple project, a block of cherry wood that had a deep, dark knot running through it. The old me would have seen it as a flaw, a piece to be discarded. But the man I was now, the man who had been forced to confront the flaws in his own life, saw it differently. I decided not to cut the knot out, but to make it the center of the piece. I began to carve around it, shaping the wood into a small, simple bird, its head tilted as if listening, the dark knot becoming its eye, its heart. As my hands moved through the familiar, practiced motions, my mind was quiet. The constant roaring loop of my daughter's words, of Michael's pained face, of the video playing on that big screen had finally begun to fade. They were still there, of course. They would always be there, but they were no longer the only thing I could hear. There was no joy in what I had done. I want to be clear about that. There was no victory in my daughter's ruin. There was no satisfaction in watching her life, a life I had helped to build, be so publicly and so completely dismantled. I had taken a father's love, a lifetime of it, and I had been forced to watch it curdle into a judge's terrible necessary duty. I had passed sentence on my own child, and the weight of that judgment, which I was a heavy thing to carry even when you knew it was just. I thought of Sarah, not with the anger I had felt, not with the cold resolve I had clung to, but with a new and final emotion, a deep and bottomless and profoundly sad pity. I pitied the little girl who had grown up believing that my love was not enough, that the honest working-class world she came from was something to be escaped, to be ashamed of. I pitied the woman who had a hole in her heart so vast that she thought she could fill it with a rich husband in a fancy house. A woman who could not tell the difference between the solid gold of a good man's love and the cheap, glittering thrill of a back-alley affair. I had lost my daughter long before that wedding day. The girl I mourned was a ghost, a memory preserved only in the fading photographs I had once put into a slideshow. The woman she had become was a stranger, and I was finally peacefully letting her go. And I thought of Michael, the son I had found in the wreckage. He had called last week just to check in. He was slowly rebuilding his firm, his life. His voice was stronger. He was healing. He and I, two men from different worlds, were now bound by a strange and quiet friendship, a bond forged in a shared betrayal. In losing a daughter, I had gained something unexpected in its place, a connection built not on blood or obligation, but on a mutual, hard-won respect for the truth. The final shape of the bird was emerging from the wood, its form smooth and graceful in my hands. I thought of Patricia, my wife. I thought of her wisdom, her gentle warnings, her unshakable understanding of our daughter's character. I had failed to listen to her for so long, but in the end, in the most terrible way, I had honored her. I had done the hard things she always knew might be necessary, and in that, I found a final quiet peace with her memory. I'd rather lose a corrupted child than see a good man destroyed. This truth had emerged from the wreckage of all my paternal hopes and dreams. It was not an easy truth, not a comfortable one, but it was mine now, earned through tears and severed ties and long nights of doubt. I set the carving down on the workbench. The afternoon sun was streaming through the dusty window, illuminating the small wooden bird. The flaw was now its most striking feature. It was not a perfect piece. It was flawed and scarred and honest, and it was beautiful. I looked out the window at Patricia's roses beginning to bud in the spring warmth. The house was silent. The phone was not ringing. The world was at peace. The war was over. I had done a terrible, necessary thing. Justice, as painful and as ugly as it had been, was done. I was not a happy man, but I was, for the first time in a very long time, a man at peace. 6 months had passed since the wedding that wasn't. 6 months of quiet days at the depot and peaceful evenings in my workshop. 6 months of gradual healing, of learning to live with the choices I had made and their consequences. The scandal had eventually died down, as scandals do, replaced by newer, fresher dramas in the social circles Sarah had been so desperate to join. I had heard little about my daughter, an occasional snippet from a mutual acquaintance, a brief mention in the local paper about her leaving her marketing job. She had moved away from Charleston, someone said, back to the city where she had attended college. Starting over, I supposed, in a place where her humiliation wasn't common knowledge. I didn't try to contact her. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Or perhaps more accurately, shouldn't be. The Sarah I had raised, the daughter I had loved with every fiber of my being, was gone. The woman who had taken her place was a stranger to me, one I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Michael, on the other hand, had become a regular presence in my life. What had begun as a single visit born of confusion and pain had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated. He called weekly. Sometimes we talked about work or sports or politics. Sometimes we didn't talk much at all. He would sit in my workshop watching me carve, occasionally handing me a tool, asking questions about the process. There was a comfort in his presence and understanding that required no words. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my first thought was that Michael had decided to stop by unannounced. But when I looked out the workshop window, I saw a sleek silver Audi that I didn't recognize. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped outside just as the car door opened. And there he stood, the man who had almost been my son-in-law, now looking at me with the eyes of an actual son. He looked different, healthier. The dark circles under his eyes were gone, replaced by a tan that suggested time spent outdoors. He had gained back the weight he had lost in those terrible weeks after the wedding, and there was an ease to his movements that had been absent before. "Robert," he said, smiling warmly as he approached. "Michael," I replied, returning his smile. "This is a surprise. I thought we were talking on Friday." "We were," he said, reaching out to shake my hand, "but I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting and thought I'd stop by. Is this a bad time?" "Never," I said honestly. "Come in. I was just finishing up for the day anyway." He stood there, the man who had almost been my son-in-law, now looking at me with the eyes of an actual son. The thought struck me with unexpected force. In the midst of all the loss, this connection had formed, this friendship that transcended the conventional boundaries of family. Michael followed me into the workshop, taking his usual seat on the old wooden stool in the corner. He looked around with interest, noting the new projects that had materialized since his last visit. "The bird," he said, spotting the cherry carving on a shelf. "You finished it." "Last month," I nodded. "It turned out better than I expected." Michael rose and went to the shelf, picking up the carving carefully. The afternoon sunlight caught the rich reddish tones of the wood, highlighting the grain and the dark knot that formed the bird's eye. "It's beautiful," he said, turning it in his hands. "The way you incorporated the flaw, it's perfect." "Not perfect," I corrected gently, "but honest. Sometimes that's better than perfect." Michael set the bird back on the shelf with care. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually. Honesty, truth." He paused, looking suddenly nervous. "And Sarah." The name hung in the air between us. We rarely spoke of her directly, both of us tacitly agreeing that the wound was still too raw. What about her, I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Michael took a deep breath. I saw her last week in Charleston. I felt a jolt of surprise. I thought she'd moved away. She had, Michael confirmed. She's back, apparently, working for a smaller firm. She looked different. Different how? I asked, despite myself. Michael considered the question. Humbled, I guess. Less polished. More real. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The image of Sarah, my Sarah, stripped of her carefully cultivated veneer, both pained and relieved me. She asked about you. Michael continued, watching my face carefully. What did you tell her? I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. The truth, he said simply, that you're doing well, that we've become friends. I nodded again, processing this information. And how did she take that? Michael smiled slightly. She was surprised, said it was the last thing she expected. He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that had become familiar to me over the months. She also said something else, Robert. Something I think you should know. I waited, my heart beating a little faster despite my efforts to remain detached. She said she understood now. What you did. Why you did it. Michael's eyes held mine steadily. She said you were right. The words hit me like a physical blow. After all this time, after the pain and the loss and the silent, empty months, to hear that Sarah had finally understood, it was almost too much to bear. Did she? I managed, turning away to hide the sudden sheen of tears in my eyes. That's good to hear. Michael was silent for a moment, respecting my need to compose myself. Then he said, there's more, Robert. Trevor and Sarah, they weren't the only ones. I turned back, confused. What do you mean? Michael's expression was grim. After the wedding, after everything fell apart, Emma started digging. She found evidence that Trevor had been unfaithful multiple times over the years, with different women, and Sarah. He hesitated. Tell me, I said, needing to hear it all now. Sarah had been involved with at least 2 other men during our engagement. Men from my professional circle, clients. Michael's voice was steady, but I could see the old pain in his eyes. She wasn't just betraying me with Trevor. It was a pattern. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet it did. Even after everything, some part of me had wanted to believe that Sarah's affair with Trevor was an aberration, a single terrible mistake, rather than a habitual behavior. I'm sorry, I said inadequately. Michael shook his head. Don't be. It actually helped in a strange way. Knowing that it wasn't just me, that I wasn't somehow insufficient. It was never about me at all. It was about her emptiness, her need for constant validation. His insight was profound, especially coming from someone who had been so deeply wounded. Michael had not only survived the betrayal, he had grown from it, gained wisdom that most people twice his age lacked. How's Emma doing? I asked, thinking of Michael's sister, another casualty of Trevor and Sarah's selfishness. Better, Michael said. She filed for divorce, of course. It was finalized last month. She's staying with our parents for now, but she's talking about moving to Seattle, making a fresh start. He smiled slightly. She's stronger than any of us realized. And Trevor, I couldn't help asking. Michael's expression hardened. His career is effectively over. His behavior violated every ethical standard in our profession. The last I heard, he was trying to get hired at a small firm in Miami. No one in Charleston will touch him. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a weary acknowledgement that actions have consequences, as they should. Michael set down his empty coffee mug and leaned forward. But that's not why I'm here, Robert. Not really. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. I think you should talk to her. To Sarah, I asked, though I knew perfectly well whom he meant. Yes, Michael said. I think she needs to tell you what she told me, and I think you need to hear it. I rose from my chair, suddenly restless. I'm not sure about that, Michael. A lot has happened. A lot of painful things were said. I know, Michael acknowledged. Believe me, I know better than anyone. But here's the thing, when I saw her last week when we talked, she's changed, Robert. The experience broke something in her, yes, but maybe it broke something that needed breaking. I looked at this young man, this person who had more reason than anyone to hate Sarah yet, who was arguing for reconciliation. His capacity for forgiveness humbled me. "You've forgiven her?" I asked quietly. Michael considered the question carefully. "Not entirely," he admitted. "I don't think I'll ever fully trust her again or want her back in my life in any significant way. But I've let go of the anger. It was poisoning me, not her." He looked at me intently. "And I think maybe you need to let go too." "I'm not angry anymore," I said, and it was mostly true. The white-hot rage I had felt at the wedding had cooled months ago, replaced by a dull ache of loss and regret. "Maybe not," Michael conceded, "but you're still in pain, and so is she." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "This is her number, her new number. She said, you could call if you wanted to. No pressure, no expectations, just a conversation." I stared at the paper, not reaching for it. "I don't know, Michael. Some things can't be fixed." "I'm not talking about fixing anything," Michael said gently. "I'm talking about finding peace. Real peace, not just the absence of conflict." He set the paper on the coffee table. "Just think about it. That's all I'm asking." He left soon after with a promise to call at the end of the week as usual. I sat alone in my living room for a long time staring at the piece of paper with Sarah's number. Such a small thing to represent such a monumental decision. I didn't call that day or the next. The paper sat on my coffee table, a silent challenge I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. I went to work, came home, spent time in my workshop. Life continued in its new, quieter rhythm. But the possibility of contact, of conversation, had been introduced, and it lingered in my thoughts. What would I say to Sarah if I did call? What could possibly bridge the chasm that had opened between us, and more importantly, did I want to try? A week passed. I was in my workshop on a Sunday afternoon working on a new project, a small jewelry box made of maple, when my phone rang. It was Michael. "Have you called her?" he asked without preamble. "No," I admitted. "I'm still thinking about it." Michael was silent for a moment. "Robert," he said finally, "can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone else?" "Of course," I said, curious. "The day after I saw Sarah, after our conversation, I went to my parents' house for dinner. Emma was there. She asked about work, about my day. Without thinking, I mentioned that I'd run into Sarah." I could imagine the scene. The sudden tension, Emma's face hardening at the mention of the woman who had been part of her husband's betrayal. "Emma was upset," Michael continued. "Understandably. She asked why I would even speak to Sarah after what she'd done. And I tried to explain about forgiveness, about letting go of anger. But Emma wasn't having it. She said something I've been thinking about ever since." "What was that?" I asked. "She said forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for yourself. It's permission to stop carrying their crime on your shoulders." Michael paused. "I think she's right, Robert. I think that's why I was able to talk to Sarah without hatred. Not because she deserves forgiveness, but because I deserve peace." His words resonated with me, touching something deep and unresolved. Did I deserve peace after what I had done, exposing Sarah so publicly, causing her humiliation and pain? "You're a wise man, Michael," I said finally. "Wiser than I was at your age. I'll think about what you've said." After we hung up, I went back to my woodworking, but my hands moved mechanically, my mind elsewhere. Emma's words relayed by Michael kept replaying in my head. Forgiveness is permission to stop carrying their crime on your shoulders. Was that what I needed? Permission to set down the burden of Sarah's betrayal, of my own harsh response. That night, I dreamed of Patricia. She was as I remembered her best. Young, vibrant, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes bright with the intelligence and compassion that had first drawn me to her. We were walking in a garden much like the one at the Kiowa River Resort, but wilder, less manicured. "You always were stubborn, Robert," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered it. "Always had to do things your own way in your own time." "Patricia," I said, reaching for her hand, "I've missed you so much." She smiled, that gentle, knowing smile that had been her signature. "I've been right here all along. In your heart, in your memories, in the way you raised our daughter." "I failed at that," I said, the old guilt washing over me. "Look how she turned out." Patricia's expression grew serious. "You didn't fail. You gave her everything you had, everything she needed. The choices she made as an adult, those were hers, not yours. But if I had done something differently, if I had seen the signs earlier." "Stop," Patricia interrupted gently. You're doing it again, trying to control what can't be controlled. Trying to take responsibility for someone else's choices. She squeezed my hand. Let it go, Robert. Let her go. I'm trying, I said, feeling tears well up. But it's hard. She was our little girl. She still is, Patricia said softly. Somewhere inside that woman who hurt you, who hurt Michael, our Sarah is still there. Lost, confused, but there. She looked at me with those wise eyes. She needs her father now more than ever. How can I be her father again after everything that's happened? I asked. Patricia's smile was sad but hopeful. The same way you've always been. With love, with honesty, with forgiveness, when it's earned. She began to fade, the garden around us growing dim. All her, Robert. Just talk. That's all you need to do for now. I woke with tears on my face and Patricia's words echoing in my mind. Call her, just talk. Was it really that simple? I doubted it. But as I lay in the darkness, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, after a restless night, I picked up the piece of paper with Sarah's number. My hands were steady as I dialed, but my heart was racing. 1 ring, 2, 3. I was about to hang up when she answered. Hello? Her voice was cautious, uncertain. Sarah, I said suddenly at a loss for words. It's me, your father. There was a long silence, so long I thought she might have hung up. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Dad, is it really you? It's me, I confirmed. Michael gave me your number. He said you might be open to talking. Another silence, then a shaky breath. Yes, she said. I'd like that. I've wanted to call you for months, but I didn't know if you'd ever want to hear from me again. The vulnerability in her voice was so different from the cold confidence I had heard at the wedding. This was a Sarah I hadn't heard in years, perhaps not since she was a teenager, uncertain and seeking approval. I'm listening now, I said simply. Not over the phone, she said quickly. Please, could we meet somewhere face to face? I hesitated. A phone call was one thing, safe, distant, easily ended. A meeting was something else entirely. It meant committing to a conversation that might be painful, difficult, with no easy escape. Where? I asked finally. Neutral ground, she suggested. Not your house or mine. Maybe that coffee shop near the depot. The one where we used to go sometimes when I was in high school. The suggestion surprised me. That particular coffee shop was a modest place frequented by working people, not the kind of upscale establishment Sarah had favored in recent years. The fact that she had chosen it seemed significant somehow. Murphy's, I said, naming the place. Tomorrow my lunch break is at 100. I'll be there, she promised. And Dad, thank you for calling, for being willing to listen. After we hung up, I sat for a long time wondering if I had made the right decision. Was I opening myself up to more pain? Was I giving Sarah an opportunity to justify or excuse her behavior? Or was this truly a chance for healing for both of us? I wouldn't know until tomorrow. Until then, all I could do was hope that Patricia, whether in my dreams or in my heart, had been right. That somewhere inside the woman who had called me human trash, our Sarah, was still there. Murphy's coffee shop hadn't changed much in the years since Sarah and I had been regular customers. The same worn booths lined the walls, the same slightly sticky laminate tables filled the center of the room. The coffee was still strong and straightforward, served in heavy ceramic mugs with no fancy names or elaborate preparations. I arrived early, selecting a booth in the corner that offered a view of the door. I ordered coffee and waited, watching the lunch crowd of mechanics, office workers, and shop clerks come and go. It was a different world from the one Sarah had chosen from the elegant resort where her wedding had imploded. I wondered what she would think of it now, if she would see it through the same dismissive eyes she had turned on me. At precisely 1 tomorrow, the bell above the door jingled and Sarah walked in. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Gone was the perfectly coiffed, designer-clad woman from the wedding. This Sarah wore simple jeans, a plain blue blouse, and minimal makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore glasses, something I hadn't seen since she'd gotten contact lenses in college. She spotted me immediately and walked over, her movements less confident than I remembered, more hesitant. She stopped at the edge of the booth, not sitting down. Dad, she said softly, her eyes meeting mine briefly before dropping away. Sarah, I replied, gesturing to the seat across from me. Please sit down. She slid into the booth, her hands immediately fidgeting with a paper napkin. Up close, I could see the changes in her more clearly. She had lost weight, not drastically, but enough to be noticeable. There were fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. A weariness in her expression that made her look older than her 30 years. You look well, she said, a pale echo of the social niceties she had once wielded so expertly. So do you, I said, though it wasn't entirely true. She looked authentic, perhaps, in a way she hadn't in years. But not well, not really. An awkward silence fell between us. So many words needed to be said, yet neither of us seemed to know where to begin. A waitress came to take Sarah's order, just coffee black, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. When the waitress left, Sarah took a deep breath and looked me directly in the eye for the first time. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice low but steady. The biggest apology of my life, and I don't even know where to start. The beginning is usually a good place, I suggested, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the emotion building in my chest. Sarah nodded, her fingers still working the napkin now shredded into small pieces. The beginning, she echoed. I guess that would be when I started to see your life, our life, as something to escape rather than something to be proud of. She shook her head. I don't even know when it happened. College, maybe. When I met people who had never worried about money, who had connections and opportunities I couldn't imagine. I remembered those years, her increasingly infrequent visits home, the subtle changes in her speech patterns, her clothing, her interests. The gradual distancing that I had attributed to normal young adult development, not realizing it was something deeper, more fundamental. I became obsessed with fitting in, Sarah continued, with being accepted by these people who seemed to have everything I thought I wanted. And somewhere along the way, I started to believe that to be one of them, I had to erase where I came from, who I came from. Her eyes met mine, filled with shame. I'm so sorry, Dad. What I said at the wedding, calling you, what I called you, it was unforgivable. Why did you say it? I asked the question that had haunted me for months, finally spoken aloud. What made you so ashamed of me, of your roots, that you could say something so cruel? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Fear, she whispered. Pure stupid fear. I was terrified that these people I'd worked so hard to impress would see through me, would realize I wasn't really one of them. And when you showed up at the wedding in your suit with your calloused hands and your straightforward manner, all my insecurities just exploded. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I lashed out at you because you represented everything I was afraid they would see in me. The explanation made a sad kind of sense. I had seen this pattern before. People who rise quickly from humble beginnings sometimes develop a deep-seated fear of being found out, of being revealed as imposters in their new social stratum. And Michael, I asked, was he just part of your disguise? Sarah flinched at the directness of the question, but she didn't look away. At first, yes, she admitted. He was perfect on paper, successful, from a good family, well-connected. But then, she paused, struggling with the words. Then I got to know him, really know him, his kindness, his integrity, and I found myself actually caring for him, maybe even loving him in my own broken way. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But it wasn't enough. I was so empty inside, so insecure that I kept looking for validation everywhere I could find it. With Trevor, with other men. You hurt him deeply. I said, not to punish her, but because it needed to be acknowledged. I know, she said, her voice catching. I've tried to apologize to him, but there aren't words adequate for that kind of betrayal. All I could do was tell him the truth, that it was never about him, never his fault. It was all me, my brokenness. I nodded, taking a sip of my cooling coffee. Michael told me you two spoke recently. We did, Sarah confirmed. He was kinder than I deserved, more forgiving. She looked at me with a hint of wonder. He told me you've become friends. We have, I said. He's a good man, Sarah. One of the best I've ever known. I know, she said softly. I knew it then too. That's why what you did, showing that video, it was the right thing. As painful and humiliating as it was, it saved him from years of lies, from me. She reached across the table hesitantly, not quite touching my hand. You did the right thing, Dad. I understand that now. The admission, so unexpected and so complete, left me momentarily speechless. I had come prepared for justifications for partial admissions of fault, for attempts to shift blame, not for this full, unequivocal acceptance of responsibility. What happened after? I asked. After the wedding, I mean. Sarah withdrew her hand, wrapping both around her coffee mug, as if seeking its warmth. It was bad, she said simply. The humiliation was total. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen. I couldn't show my face anywhere in Charleston. She took a shaky breath. I moved back to Atlanta, where I'd gone to college. Got a job at a small firm, nowhere near as prestigious as my old one, but they were willing to give me a chance. I've been rebuilding, I guess you could say. Alone, I asked, wondering if there was someone in her life, now someone who might be a positive influence. She nodded. Completely alone, for the first time in my adult life. No boyfriend, no fiancé, very few friends. She gave a small, sad smile. It turns out when you're exposed as a cheater and a social climber, your social circle tends to contract pretty dramatically. There was no self-pity in her tone, just a weary acknowledgement of consequence. It struck me again how different this Sarah was from the polished, confident woman who had so coldly dismissed me at her wedding. Why did you come back to Charleston? I asked. To face it, she said simply. To face what I'd done, the people I'd hurt. I couldn't hide in Atlanta forever pretending it never happened. She looked around the coffee shop, taking in the modest surroundings. And to reconnect with my roots, the real me before I got so lost. And who is that? I asked. The real you. Sarah considered the question, her brow furrowed in thought. I'm still figuring that out, she admitted. But I know she's not the person who cared more about status than honesty. Not the person who would betray a good man for a thrill. Not the person who could look her father in the eye and call him trash. A lump formed in my throat. I wanted to believe her, to believe that this remorse, this self-awareness was genuine and lasting. But trust once broken so completely is not easily restored. I've changed, Dad, she said as if reading my thoughts. The person I was at that wedding, that wasn't really me. It was this creation I'd built, this persona I thought I needed to be successful to be accepted. She shook her head. It took losing everything to realize how hollow that person was, how miserable she was making me. And now, I asked, now I'm trying to be honest. With myself, with others. It's harder than I expected. She smiled faintly. It turns out the truth doesn't always make you popular. No, I agreed, but it does let you sleep at night. Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. I've missed you, Dad, she whispered. So much. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, not after everything I said, everything I did. But I want you to know that I am truly deeply sorry for all of it. The tears she had been fighting spilled over, then running unchecked down her face. She made no move to wipe them away, no attempt to hide her emotion. This perhaps more than anything convinced me of her sincerity. The old Sarah would never have allowed herself to be seen in such a vulnerable state. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. It was cold despite the coffee mug she had been clutching, and it trembled slightly in my grasp. I've missed you too, I said, my own voice rough with emotion. Every day. We sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, tears flowing freely. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't reconciliation or healing, or any of the other neat, tidy terms people use for messy human emotions. It was simply a connection reestablished, a door reopened that both of us had thought was permanently closed. When we finally pulled apart, wiping our eyes with paper napkins and drawing curious glances from the other patrons, Sarah asked, "What happens now?" It was a good question, one I had been asking myself since Michael first suggested this meeting. What did happen now? Could we rebuild a relationship from the ashes of the old one? Should we even try? I don't know. I answered honestly. I think we start small. Coffee again, maybe. Phone calls. Getting to know each other as we are now, not as we were. Sarah nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and caution. I'd like that, she said. Very much. We talked for another hour, carefully avoiding the most painful topics, focusing instead on the present. Her new job, my work at the depot, my wood-carving hobby. It was stilted, at times awkward, both of us feeling our way forward with extreme caution. But underneath the awkwardness, there was something else. a tentative, fragile honesty that had been absent from our interactions for years. When it was time for me to return to work, we walked out of the coffee shop together. On the sidewalk outside, Sarah turned to me, her expression uncertain. "Thank you," she said, "for meeting me, for listening, for giving me a chance I don't deserve." "Everyone deserves a chance to change," I said, thinking of Patricia's words in my dream. "To make amends." Sarah nodded, blinking back fresh tears. "Same time next week?" She asked, her voice hesitant, as if expecting rejection. "Same time," I confirmed. "I'll be here." We didn't hug or shake hands. We weren't ready for that yet. But as she turned to walk to her car, I felt something shift inside me, a loosening of the tight knot of grief and anger I had carried for so long. As I walked back to the depot, I thought about what Michael had said, what Emma had told him. Forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for yourself. It's permission to stop carrying their crime on your shoulders. I wasn't ready to forgive Sarah completely. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too profound, but I had taken the first step towards setting down the burden I had carried these past months. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed settled into a new pattern. Coffee with Sarah every Tuesday, phone calls on the weekend. Slowly, tentatively, we began to rebuild a relationship. Not the one we had had before, but something new. Something based on honesty rather than expectation or obligation. I learned about her new life in Charleston, the small apartment she had rented far from the upscale neighborhood where she had once lived with Michael. The modest job at a marketing firm that valued her skills, but not her social connections. The volunteer work she had begun at a literacy program for underprivileged children. "I wanted to give something back," she explained during one of our coffee meetings, "to do something that mattered beyond just getting ahead." I saw changes in her that went beyond the superficial, a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before, a humility that seemed genuine rather than calculated, a willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and take responsibility for all of them. Michael noticed the changes too. "She's really trying," he said during one of his visits to my workshop. "I can see it." "Do you think it will last?" I asked, voicing the doubt that still lingered. Michael considered the question seriously. I think, I think the experience broke something fundamental in her," he said finally. "Her belief that she could manipulate people in situations without consequences. That's not something you can unlearn easily." He picked up a scrap of wood, turning it in his hands. "So yes, I think the change is real, but that doesn't mean it will be easy or straightforward. Nothing worthwhile ever is." I agreed. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 months after our first coffee meeting, Sarah asked if she could come to the house. "Just to talk," she said, "somewhere more private than Murphy's." I hesitated, then agreed. The house held so many memories for both of us, some good, some painful. It seemed fitting somehow that the next stage of our reconciliation should happen there. She arrived promptly at the agreed-upon time, carrying a small paper bag. "I brought muffins," she said, holding it up, "from that bakery you used to like on 3rd Street. The gesture touched me. It was such a small thing, remembering my favorite bakery, but it spoke of a thoughtfulness that the old Sarah had rarely demonstrated. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let her enter. "Coffee's ready." She walked into the living room and stopped, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. The worn furniture, the faded rug, the photographs on the walls, including several of her at various ages. Her expression was unreadable. "It hasn't changed much," she said finally. "No reason for it to," I replied, leading the way to the kitchen. "It suits me fine as it is." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten thousands of meals together over the years. I poured coffee, she arranged muffins on plates. The domesticity of the scene was both comforting and strange. "I've been thinking a lot about Mom lately," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between us. The mention of Patricia caught me off guard. We had spoken very little about her since her death, both of us finding the subject too painful. "What about her?" I asked carefully. Sarah traced the rim of her coffee mug with one finger, her eyes distant. "I keep wondering what she would think of me now, of what I did, who I became." She looked up, her expression vulnerable. "Do you think she would be disappointed?" The question was so raw, so honest that it took my breath away. I think," I said slowly, "that she would be torn about the choices you made. But I also think she would be proud of what you're doing now, taking responsibility, trying to make amends. Sarah nodded, blinking back tears. I wish she were here, she whispered. I could use her wisdom right now. So could I admitted. Every day. We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in memories of Patricia. Then Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. I brought something else, she said, sliding it across the table to me. It's not much, but I unwrapped the package to find a framed photograph. It showed the three of us, Patricia, Sarah, and me, well, at the beach when Sarah was about 10 years old. We were all laughing, our arms around each other, waves crashing behind us. I remembered the day clearly, a rare family vacation made possible by months of saving and overtime shifts. Where did you find this? I asked, my throat tight with emotion. In one of my old photo albums, Sarah said. I thought you might like to have it. I studied the photograph, taking in the genuine joy on all our faces, the easy intimacy of a family still whole and happy. Thank you, I said, simply unable to express how much the gesture meant to me. Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I've been going through a lot of old things lately, she said, reminding myself of who I was before I got so lost. She hesitated, then added, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about, something important. I set the photograph down carefully. What is it? She took a deep breath. I've been seeing someone, she said, a therapist, for a couple of months now. This was unexpected. The old Sarah would have considered therapy beneath her a sign of weakness. That's good, I said, meaning it. Is it helping? Yeah, it is, she nodded. It's hard, really hard sometimes. But it's helping me understand why I did the things I did, why I became the person I was. She met my eyes directly. The therapist thinks I have some deep-seated issues with self-worth, that all the striving, the social climbing affairs, they were all attempts to fill a hole inside me to prove I was worthy of love and respect. The insights seemed profound and yet in retrospect obvious. Sarah had lost her mother at a crucial age, had grown up with a father who, though loving, had been emotionally reserved and often physically absent due to work demands. Was it so surprising that she had developed insecurities, doubts about her inherent worth? She also thinks, Sarah continued, her voice dropping slightly, that I should write letters to the people I've hurt. Not necessarily to send them, but to articulate my remorse, to fully acknowledge the pain I caused. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. I wrote one to you. My heart rate increased. And are you going to send it? I asked. I'd like to read it to you, she said, if that's okay. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sarah unfolded the paper with slightly trembling hands and began to read. Dear Dad, there aren't words adequate to express my remorse for the way I have treated you, not just at the wedding, but for years before. You gave me everything. Your love, your support, your hard-earned money, your unwavering belief in my potential. And in return, I gave you contempt, dismissal, and ultimately public humiliation. I wish I could blame it on something external, peer pressure, alcohol, temporary insanity. But the truth is both simpler and more painful. I lost sight of what truly matters in life. I became so focused on status, on appearances, on being accepted by people who didn't really know or care about me, that I forgot the one person who had always been there, always loved me unconditionally. When I called you human trash at my wedding, I committed an unforgivable act. Those words can never be taken back, and the pain they caused can never be fully healed. But I want you to know that in that moment, I wasn't really seeing you. The dedicated father who worked overtime to pay for my dance lessons, who sat through countless school plays and recitals, who taught me to change a tire and balance a checkbook and stand up for myself. I was seeing a reflection of my own deepest fears and insecurities, the parts of myself I was so desperate to deny. You were right to expose my betrayal of Michael. He deserved to know the truth before committing his life to someone who was lying to him, using him. And in a strange way, I needed to be exposed too. I needed to face the consequences of my actions, to confront the person I had become. The past 6 months have been the hardest of my life. I've lost friend status, professional opportunities, but I've gained something much more valuable: clarity. I've begun to see myself as I truly am. Flawed, broken in some fundamental ways, but also capable of growth, of change, of becoming someone better than I was. I don't expect forgiveness, Dad. What I did goes beyond what any parent should have to forgive. But I do hope for understanding, for the chance to show you through my actions that I am not the same person who stood in that ballroom and publicly rejected everything you are, everything you gave me. I love you, Dad. I always have, even when I was too lost, too consumed by ambition and insecurity to show it. And I always will. Your daughter, Sarah. By the time she finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. I wasn't in much better shape myself, my vision blurred, my hands gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. Sarah, I began, then stopped, unable to find words adequate to the moment. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table between us. You don't have to say anything, she said softly. I just wanted you to know how I feel, what I'm thinking. The rest is up to you. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, seeing past the surface changes to the person beneath. The remorse in her eyes was genuine, the pain real. But there was something else too, a strength, a clarity of purpose that had been absent before. This wasn't the entitled young woman who had dismissed me so casually, nor was it the broken, desperate person who might say anything to regain what she had lost. This was someone new, someone still forming, still finding her way forward. The bird, I said, suddenly the idea coming to me fully formed. Wait here. I went to my workshop and retrieved the cherry wood carving, the small bird with the dark knot forming its eye. When I returned to the kitchen, I placed it on the table in front of Sarah. I made this, I said, during those first difficult weeks after the wedding. I started it as a way to keep my hands busy, to quiet my mind, but it became something more. Sarah picked up the carving, turning it carefully to examine the details. It's beautiful, she said, the way you incorporated the knot instead of cutting it out. Exactly, I said. I used to see knots as flaws, as defects to be removed, but this time I decided to make it the centerpiece, the most distinctive part of the carving. Sarah looked up, understanding dawning in her eyes. Because flaws don't have to be hidden, she said slowly. They can be integrated, accepted. I nodded, pleased that she had grasped the metaphor so quickly. We all have knots in our grains, Sarah. Imperfections, dark spots, areas of damage. We can spend our lives trying to hide them, to cut them out, to pretend they don't exist. Or we can acknowledge them, work with them, maybe even find a way to make them part of our beauty. She ran her finger gently over the knot that formed the bird's eye. Do you think I can do that? She asked, her voice small. Find a way to integrate my flaws, my mistakes into something, if not beautiful, then at least honest. I think you already have, I said, by acknowledging what you did, by taking responsibility for it, by seeking help to understand it. Those are all acts of integration, of acceptance. She set the bird down gently, her eyes meeting mine. I want to be someone you can be proud of again, she said. Someone I can be proud of. The journey matters more than the destination, I told her, and you've already taken the first hardest steps. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just months ago. I'd like you to have the bird as a reminder. Her eyes widened. Dad, no, it's your work. You should keep it. I shook my head. I made it for myself to help me process what had happened, but I think it's meant for you now. A symbol of what's possible when we stop fighting our flaws and start working with them instead. Sarah looked at the carving again, her expression thoughtful. Thank you, she said finally. I'll treasure it. As she rose to leave a while later, the bird carefully wrapped and tucked into her purse, I walked her to the door. We stood awkwardly on the threshold, neither quite sure how to end this significant encounter. Same time next Tuesday, she asked, echoing the question from our first coffee meeting. Same time, I confirmed. Then, acting on impulse, I opened my arms. Sarah stepped into my embrace without hesitation, her body fitting against mine as naturally as it had when she was a child. She felt smaller somehow, more fragile, but also more real than the polished, perfected version of herself she had presented to the world for so long. I love you, Dad, she whispered against my shoulder. I love you too. I replied, the words coming easily now, without the doubt and reservation that had shadowed them in recent years. As I watched her drive away, I thought about the wooden bird and its distinctive knot, about Sarah and her flaws, about myself and my own imperfections. None of us was whole or perfect. All of us carry damaged darkness, the potential for both cruelty and kindness. What mattered perhaps was not the absence of flaws, but what we chose to do with them. Hide them, deny them, or integrate them into the fullness of who we were. I had lost a daughter once to ambition and insecurity and the lure of a world that valued appearance over substance. I wasn't naive enough to think that a few months of therapy and heartfelt conversations could completely transform her, could erase the patterns of a lifetime. But I had glimpsed in her remorse and her efforts to change the possibility of a new relationship built not on illusion, but on truth. Sometimes the heaviest silence is not the one of grief, but the one that follows a truth that has finally and irrevocably been spoken. The truth had been spoken between Sarah and me. Painful, ugly truths that had needed to be acknowledged before healing could begin. The silence that followed was not empty, but full pregnant with possibility. I returned to my workshop to the half-finished jewelry box waiting on my bench. As I picked up my tools and began to work, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not the resigned, lonely peace of those first months after the wedding, but something warmer, more hopeful. I had raised my daughter to be strong, but I had never taught her that true strength lies in character, not ambition. Perhaps it wasn't too late for both of us to learn that lesson together. The scent of cherry wood filled the air as I worked, reminding me of the bird I had carved now in Sarah's possession. I hoped it would serve as both a reminder and a promise that flaws need not be fatal, that integration is possible, that beauty can emerge from even the darkest knots in our grain.